The universe is much stranger than it seems at first glance. Mysterious objects are found on the surface of Mars, and in deep space, probes like Voyager 1 detect unusual signals. The very laws of space may turn out to be much more complex than the familiar 3 dimensions. But behind each such mystery, there is usually a perfectly real explanation. In this video, we'll try to figure out what's really going on.
Attention! An artificial object has been discovered on Mars. What is it? A message from aliens? Or a harbinger of the apocalypse? That's exactly how the headlines would sound in publications loved by conspiracy theorists and reptilian witnesses. But we're not them. The Hubble channel always tries to get to the bottom of any phenomenon or event, presenting the opinions of all sides and the results of authoritative research. So everyone knows that no human has ever visited any celestial body other than the moon. But traces of humanity are still present both within the solar system and beyond its boundaries. While Elon Musk is preparing a manned expedition to Mars, which is expected to be a real sensation, over many years of astronomical research, quite a few probes have settled on the red planet that will never return to Earth. It would seem that all space agencies are aware of this, but sometimes, when they find fragments of spacecraft, they are genuinely surprised at where they came from on the lifeless surface of Mars. Once, in one of the locations on our dusty neighbor, an artificial object was detected, a cylinder shining in the sunlight, standing out among the scattered stones. How did this fragment appear on the red planet, and what other surprises await us? In fact, Mars can be called conditionally habitable without exaggeration, since traces of our civilization's activity are increasingly being detected among its rusty hills. Currently, several active probes are exploring the planet, while the remains of others, long out of service, are buried in the Martian sands. Interestingly, the total mass of such objects currently reaches about 7 tons. Since 1971, 16 Earth probes have visited the red planet with varying degrees of success. Naturally, they couldn't help but leave their mark on the surface of Mars. So the appearance of the mysterious cylinder is also significant. Most likely, it's a casing that fell off the Viking 2 probe during landing. But let's take it step by step. The mentioned spacecraft was sent to Mars as part of the American Viking program and operated on the red planet for more than 19 months. The station consisted of an orbiter and a lander, with the former failing 2 years earlier. During its descent on September 3, 1976, Viking 2 jettisoned its ballast and deployed its braking parachutes according to the usual procedure in order to make a soft landing in the Utopia Planitia region. This is a rather strange area, 3,300 kilometers in diameter, completely covered with rocks of various sizes. There are practically no craters here, and Utopia is located in the northern hemisphere of Mars. Apparently, it is an ancient impact crater, so huge that it's difficult to properly identify it. Since the landscape here is quite monotonous and bleak, it's no surprise that scientists were drawn to a small cylinder, clearly visible in the photos sent to Earth by the probe. The fact is, the main activity of Viking 2 was collecting soil samples. For this purpose, a sampler was used, which was usually covered with a special cap when it was not in use. But as soon as the device was ready, the cover automatically popped off, hitting a nearby rock. As a result, the part remained on Mars, just like Viking 2 itself. Overall, the situation described is standard, since every spacecraft and its structural parts take up permanent residence on the lifeless expanses of the red planet at the moment of landing. Of course, a 30-centimeter long cover is too tiny a part to be seen from a satellite, but the Spirit spacecraft, which landed on Mars on January 4th, 2004, can definitely be seen. Now the probe is covered with impenetrable bronze sands in the Gusev crater. It can easily be mistaken for an ordinary rock. But there was a time when the spacecraft was working very productively and exceeded the agency's planned active time many times over. Spirit operated until 2010 although it was expected to last no more than 90 sols or 92.5 Earth days. Gusev Crater is an interesting location which may have once been a lake, but Spirit traveled not only along the bottom of this hypothetical ancient body of water. As much as it could, it explored all the nearby craters and hills. Unfortunately, the storms here rather quickly and significantly reduced the power output of the solar panels, but was it able to recover? Surprisingly, even on Mars, the saying "fight fire with fire" works perfectly. Dust devils, small whirlwinds that periodically sweep across the planet's surface, helped clean the batteries and thus extended the lifespan of the Spirit probe. The last communication session with the Mars rover took place on March 22, 2010. The probe likely died due to battery failure, which was also preceded by getting stuck in Martian sand. Spirit was never able to escape from the hellish trap. It is still deep inside a sand dune near a huge formation called Home Plate, buried under a heavy layer of dust. What other spacecraft have met their end on Mars? First of all, we should consider the failed attempts at soft landing on the surface of the red planet, which involved the following probes. Mars 2. The wreckage is located in the Xanthi Terra region. Moreover, it became the first artificial object to reach a planet of the solar system other than Earth. Mars 3. Its remains at the bottom of the Ptolemaeus crater were discovered by the Mars Orbiter satellite. Soviet Mars 6. It left a 4-meter crater in Mare Erythraeum after the crash. Mars Polar Lander. It entered the atmosphere of the red planet and disappeared without a trace. To this day, the situation remains a mystery. Deep Space 2, which participated in NASA's New Millennium program, made a fatal hard landing on the red planet. The British Beagle 2 successfully landed on the surface of Mars, but never made contact. The almost undamaged probe was discovered only 12 years later, in 2015. Schiaparelli crashed onto the surface of the red planet, falling from a height of 4 kilometers. But that's far from all. Among the craters and mountains of our closest neighbor, you can find spacecraft that, for various reasons, stopped their productive work. The oldest of the probes was Opportunity in 2004, which landed in Eagle Crater on the Meridiani Plateau. The spacecraft passed by many craters and survived several dust storms, but the last planet-wide storm, the size of North America, which caught the rover in Perseverance Valley, proved fatal. It is believed that Opportunity froze because sunlight could not reach its battery through the thick layer of dust. But to this day, the traces of this remarkable probe can still be seen on Mars. Do you think there is no life on the red planet? Not in our understanding, but the Steel Phoenix is still present here. The rover was launched by NASA in 2007, and a year later it began actively roaming the surface of Mars's polar region. This is the first device to discover water on the seemingly dead surface of our rocky neighbor. Unfortunately, Phoenix remained in the icy embrace of the Martian Arctic, unable to rise from the ashes like in the fairy tale. Is it true that all Mars rovers either turned into wreckage, froze, or got covered in dust? Of course not. At the moment, 5 probes are actively operating on the surface of Mars, and one of them is currently making its first flights in the atmosphere of the red planet. By the way, based on the achievements of this innovative Mars helicopter, a project for a Titan exploration vehicle called Dragonfly is being developed. If you look at a map of Mars or at the planet's surface from satellites, it becomes obvious that our dusty neighbor is not so lonely. Various probes are actively roaming its valleys. Curiosity, Insight, Perseverance, Ingenuity, and Tianwen-1. And some regions jealously preserve traces of past catastrophes. That's why future colonists who will soon settle the red planet won't feel alone. Without even realizing it, we're already beginning to inhabit Mars. I want to start this episode with the phrase that begins every fairy tale. Long ago, 44 years ago, this amazing story happened. That would be fine, but in our story, there won't be a drop of magic, only reliable facts and real events. So, back in 1977, the Americans launched a project called Voyager 1. As part of it, 2 probes with the same name were sent into space. The scenario seems pretty ordinary, but the results of this campaign exceeded all expectations. Have you ever heard the sounds of space? Of course, some of you might argue that a vacuum is absolutely silent, since sound waves can only travel when there are molecules to transmit vibrations. Nevertheless, thanks to computer processing, we can hear the booming rumbles of Venus, the monotonous howl of Jupiter, and the pulsating cacophony of Mercury. But these, you could say, are local voices. What does the echo of deep space sound like? Only the Voyagers and the pioneers have been there, but contact with them was lost long ago. A bit later, we'll give you a chance to hear the eerie sounds of the universe, but for now, let's briefly describe the most interesting stages of the 2 probes' mission, which is still ongoing. The highly autonomous spacecraft were designed to study the outer planets of the solar system, with the subsequent goal of sending the probes beyond the heliosphere. When organizing the mission, past mistakes were taken into account. For example, Pioneer 10 stopped responding, probably because its radioisotope power source was depleted. By the way, it is assumed that the spacecraft is now heading toward Aldebaran, and this journey will take about 2 million years. Therefore, the issue of powering the probes needed special attention. Both Voyagers were equipped by engineers with their own thermoelectric generators powered by plutonium-238 and rocket engines, as well as numerous computers and other useful equipment, spectrometers, cameras, a plasma complex, and so on. Despite minor problems, the spacecraft managed to successfully explore the outer planets of the solar system and head into the depths of open space. Everyone knows that the boundaries of our parent star's domain do not end just beyond Neptune. The Voyagers, carrying golden records with the sounds of Earth, volcanic eruptions, the noise of the wind, and a baby's cry, still had a very long and difficult journey ahead of them. Fortunately, the technical capabilities of both Voyagers allow us to communicate with them until 2030. What task are the probes currently working on? The main goal of the spacecraft is to study the transition region between the plasma inside the solar system and the area in interstellar space. Both spacecraft crossed the first boundary separating our planets from the cold darkness of space, the heliospheric shock wave, several years ago. Voyager 1 did this in December 2004 and Voyager 2 in August 2007. The shockwave boundary is a region located inside the heliosphere. It is here that the solar wind suddenly slows down to subsonic speeds as it collides with interstellar matter. It is worth noting that for the first 10 billion years, the solar wind travels at a speed of about 1 million kilometers per hour, and only the presence of cosmic particles is able to slow down this rapid journey. After the aforementioned milestone, the spacecraft faced the next notional boundary, the heliopause, which, according to scientists, they were not expected to reach even 10 years after crossing the shockwave boundary. Therefore, most likely, the event has already taken place. The heliopause can technically be compared to an airlock, where the pressure is equalized when astronauts go out into open space. It is here that the speed parameters of the solar wind and the interstellar medium reach acceptable values, and partial mutual assimilation of matter also occurs. In fact, there have been debates about the nature of the heliopause for years. At one time, it was believed to be located not far from Jupiter's orbit. But Voyager 2 dispelled this myth. Since no one knew where this boundary was, astronomers doubted that the probe would cross it before it stopped working. But the encounter happened before that occurred. Officially, Voyager 2 crossed the heliopause in 2018, and it turned out that it is 120 times farther from the Sun than the Earth is. Thanks to the measurements that were periodically sent by both probes, it was possible to find out that the heliosphere is quite elastic. During periods of solar activity, it inflates like a balloon and then returns to its previous size. What other discovery did Voyager 2 make? In 2020, its plasma sensors detected one inexplicable oddity. The farther the probe moves away from the Sun, the greater the density of interstellar space becomes. Perhaps the particles sharply slow down as they approach the heliopause and pile up on each other like a snowball. There is another theory as well. It suggests that the interstellar magnetic field collides with the heliosphere, creating a kind of corridor between the heliopause and the rest of space. By the way, according to measurements, interstellar magnetism, although 64,000 times weaker than Earth's,
всего 7 микрогауссов,
is still capable of exerting a certain pressure on the heliosphere. Anyway, the question of increased matter density remains open. Scientists still have to find an answer to it. Is there a danger of destruction for both Voyagers under such conditions? Theoretically, yes, because according to common hypotheses beyond the bow shock wave, the so-called Rubicon, when crossing into the absolute vacuum of space, there is another region filled with hot hydrogen. Scientists have called it the hydrogen wall. The hypothetical bow shock wave is located at a distance of 230 astronomical units from the Sun, and the Voyagers still have to cross it. Although many astronomers consider this supposed boundary to be a mere fabrication. However, let's get back to the Voyagers. Where are they now? The first spacecraft crossed the boundaries of interstellar space back in 2012. Its sensors detected an increase in galactic rays and later, a sharp decrease in solar wind particles. This data serves as convincing evidence that the probe is finally leaving the heliosphere. The spacecraft recorded the strange sound at this location, a monotonous hum interrupted by a piercing whistle. It's unclear what exactly causes the eerie moaning, but it definitely gives you goosebumps. Some astronomers claim that the sharp whistle is probably caused by regular solar flares reaching the edges of the heliosphere. Voyager 1 overheard all of this in passing, since its journey is not yet over. In about 40,000 years, it will pass by the red dwarf Gliese 445, which is slowly approaching the Sun, and will continue to wander forever through our galaxy. But what about Voyager 2? It's also flying somewhere in the darkness of space. As already mentioned, 14 years ago, the probe successfully crossed the heliospheric shock wave and passed the heliopause. Thanks to the data obtained from Voyager 2, it was proven that the heliosphere is not a perfect sphere. On the contrary, it is a flattened oval with northern boundaries farther from the Sun. Were there any anomalies in the information transmitted by the spacecraft? Yes, there was one discrepancy. Scientists expected that at the shockwave boundary, the temperature should be much higher than inside the heliosphere, but that didn't happen. To be more precise, it was hot, but not as much as astronomers expected. The question is, where did the discrepancies come from, and where did the extra energy go? So far, all of this remains unanswered. Voyager 2 is currently about 20 billion kilometers away and is confidently heading toward the Oort cloud, which it will reach in about 3 centuries. And to fly through this spherical region, it will need at least 30,000 years. It's a pity that we will never know about it. The half-life of plutonium is almost 90 years. And already now, the energy resources of the spacecraft have dropped to 40% or less. Both spacecraft, launched a month apart, are now hundreds of astronomical units away. They are not planning to stop. They are expected to encounter stars, rogue planets, lonely comets, and clusters of asteroids. Thanks to the probes, we now know what the emptiness of the macrocosm sounds like. And we have empirically confirmed the existence of the heliosphere, which protects our planetary system from the aggressive effects of galactic rays. Hello to all the viewers of the Hubble channel from the three-dimensional world. Would you like to take a look into the fourth dimension right now? The very one where ordinary rotation of an object is perceived by the human brain as a universal catastrophe? To avoid losing your mind during this hellish journey, watch this video until the end. You can consider it a detailed video guide because surviving in a 4D world without preparation is very difficult. We don't send our astronauts into deadly space unprepared. As part of our virtual journey, we will visit all the worlds in sequence, up to the 4-dimensional one. Have you changed your mind? Then listen and remember. In the beginning, there was a point. Does the universe after the Big Bang come to mind? Discard analogies and move on. Today we're not talking about the mysterious realm of singularity, but about geometric spaces. A single point on a plane is, by definition, zero-dimensional, since it has neither length nor width nor height. Take a closer look at it. And welcome to space number 0. It is necessary to state a regrettable fact. The zero-dimensional world is boring and monotonous. Movement is impossible here, and the outlook is limited. So let's leave it as soon as possible while the neurons in our brain are still active and able to perceive information. We'll need them later. How do we move from zero-dimensional space to 1D? It's as simple as can be. We take a pencil and draw a straight line from the point. Here we are in a one-dimensional reality since a straight line has only one parameter, length. Unfortunately, the 1D world is just as dull and bland, and movement here is only possible forward and backward along the plane of the drawn ray. So before we turn into a meaningless column of mercury, let's try to leave this deserted one-dimensional dimension as quickly as possible. Maybe in 2D space, the traveler will encounter a more epic sight. Let's check it out now. The way to it isn't long. We just make a rectangle out of the ready-made lines. Now we have access to two parameters, length and width. Based on them, we can already build something worthwhile. Just remember the relatively lively worlds of pixel games like the depressing Yume Nikki or the cheerful Super Mario. If a person found themselves in one of these realities, they would feel very uncomfortable. Even if we tried to ignore the constant and irritating noise, we would still experience strange feelings, especially when looking at objects in profile, because instead of seeing beings and items, we would only see one-dimensional lines. This is exactly what a flat world labeled 2D would be like. By the way, our 3-dimensional reality can easily be turned into a 2-dimensional one if we flatten the Earth like a tin can. Before that happens, let's fly away quickly. To move into the familiar 3D space, it's enough to draw lines perpendicular to the flat segment. You get a parallelepiped, which, in addition to length and width, also has height. Here we are back home. After these inhospitable and alien worlds, you don't really want to leave your own familiar one. But the goal of our journey is 4-dimensional space. So we continue our journey. First, consider what enables us to perceive the world in 3 dimensions. There is an interesting feature. The human eye is only able to perceive static objects that have length, width, and height as 2-dimensional. Take a closer look at the still image on the monitor screen. You only see 2D projections of 3-dimensional objects. If we had the ability to perceive our surroundings in 3D, we would notice every single object within our field of vision. The following example is perfect for explaining this phenomenon. Imagine a room where a box is placed behind a dresser. If we had 3-dimensional vision, we would see both the box and the dresser at the same time. But that's impossible. And only when objects move in space does the truth reveal itself to us. Eureka, it turns out we're in a 3D reality. By the way, the same thing happens to the inhabitants of a 2-dimensional space. Until the object starts moving, they see it as 1D. For example, the parallel pipe that we drew a couple of minutes ago to return to our world, the inhabitants of a 2D reality would not be able to imagine it. This happens because it's impossible to imagine something whose laws are incomprehensible. It is precisely the lack of information that prevents a person from clearly imagining space labeled as 4D. People understand the properties of their own three-dimensional world only because it is tangible. Perhaps there are plenty of other spatial vectors around us, it's just that our consciousness is not tuned to perceive them. It should be understood if we are unable to imagine something, it does not mean that it doesn't exist at all. So, is it possible to imagine the fourth dimension without using drugs? The geometry of 4D is most clearly demonstrated by the tesseract, a rather strange figure also known as a hypercube. It's an analog of the familiar cube but adapted to the fourth dimension. Building such a figure is simple, but first it's worth mentioning that an ordinary cube can exist anywhere, though it will look different depending on where it is. For example, in 0D space, it's that very point that was mentioned at the beginning of the video. To turn it into a one-dimensional cube, you need to draw another point and connect them with a line. For the 2D world, you should duplicate what you've drawn once more and again connect the points. As a result, you'll get a flat square, which is the two-dimensional version of a familiar cube. Next, it's easy to use the shapes we already have to create the familiar cube we all know from childhood. You need to place two flat squares next to each other and connect their vertices. But is it possible based on this algorithm to form a tesseract, a futuristic four-dimensional cube? The scheme is no different from the one used in the other cases. We place two three-dimensional figures side by side, connect their vertices, and the hypercube is ready. But there is one problem. It's difficult for the human brain to perceive this intricate figure as a cube. Therefore, remembering that people can only see three-dimensional objects in motion, we'll have to rotate the resulting figure a bit. This is where the psychedelic effects begin, and seeing them makes you feel like a primitive inhabitant of a two-dimensional world. The thing is, a regular rotation of a hypercube around its axis looks bizarre in our reality. The human mind perceives it not as movement, but as a deformation of the object. Moreover, it's hard to even identify a cube in the rotating geometric monstrosity. It's even more fascinating to imagine what would happen to a person who accidentally ended up in 4D space while still interacting with the three-dimensional world. Such an individual would be perceived by us as a divine embodiment. After all, he could walk through walls, teleport, easily move objects from one world to another, and even perform surgical procedures non-invasively, like the legendary healers. And now, to catch your breath, think about this. If a four-dimensional world is so difficult to understand, is it even worth talking about spaces with an infinite number of dimensions? If you're watching this video, and especially if you're liking it, it's safe to assume that your interest in the mysterious laws of the universe is not the least important thing in your life. To test yourself, try solving one simple problem. Try to finish the quote by the great Stephen Hawking. The beginning of the famous phrase goes like this: "The universe is infinite." The author of the most interesting continuation of this excerpt will definitely receive a prize from our channel. We welcome creative ideas in the comments.